Imagine watching the sun disappear behind frozen mountains knowing it may not rise on a world that can feed you again for months. The rivers have turned to ice. The animals have vanished. Every breath burns your lungs, and every mistake brings death closer. For ancient humans, winter wasn't a season. It was an enemy that returned every single year. The darkest survival method wasn't hunting dangerous animals or fighting predators. It was making impossible decisions before winter even arrived. Long before the first snowfall, ancient hunter-gatherers had to predict whether enough food would exist to carry them through months when the landscape offered almost nothing. Archaeological evidence from Ice Age sites across Europe and Asia shows that many groups intensified hunting during late summer and autumn, taking advantage of migrating herds when animals carried the greatest fat reserves. Fat mattered just as much as meat. It provided dense calories that helped people survive freezing temperatures when energy demands rose dramatically. Missing this narrow window could prove catastrophic. A successful hunt in October might determine whether children survived until spring. Unlike modern supermarkets that replenish every day, nature offered only brief opportunities. Herds migrated, rivers froze, edible plants disappeared beneath snow. Once winter tightened its grip, replacing lost calories became far more difficult. This forced entire communities to think months ahead. Every decision became an investment in the future. Should they eat today or preserve food for later? Should they remain where resources were disappearing or risk traveling through blizzards toward uncertain hunting grounds? There were no perfect answers, only choices with different dangers. The people who survived were often those who planned better, wasted less, and prepared long before winter actually arrived. Perhaps the most valuable thing an ancient hunter brought back wasn't meat, it was fat. Modern diets often treat fat as something to avoid, but during Ice Age winters it could mean the difference between life and death. Human bodies burn enormous amounts of energy simply maintaining core temperature in freezing environments. Lean meat alone cannot always provide enough usable energy for prolonged survival. In fact, relying almost entirely on very lean wild meat for extended periods can lead to protein poisoning, sometimes called rabbit starvation, because the body requires sufficient fat or carbohydrates alongside protein. Ancient hunters understood this through experience rather than chemistry. They prized marrow hidden inside large bones. They carefully collected fatty tissues surrounding organs. Nothing nutritious was casually discarded. Fresh meat could spoil quickly, especially during milder periods, but frozen temperatures also created opportunities. In some regions, naturally cold conditions helped preserve carcasses for longer periods, allowing communities to consume valuable food over time rather than immediately. Every successful kill became a carefully managed resource. Bones became tools. Hides became clothing. Tendons became cordage. Fat became fuel for both the body and, in some cultures and later periods, for simple lamps. Winter demanded efficiency. Waste wasn't merely irresponsible. It could become fatal before the snow finally melted. Even with enough food, there was another enemy waiting, the cold itself. You might think the obvious solution was simply building a bigger fire. Ancient humans knew it wasn't that simple. A fire only warmed the space around it. Step a few meters away, and freezing air immediately began stealing heat from your body again. During long winters, staying alive depended on trapping warmth, not constantly creating it. Archaeological discoveries show that Ice Age people became remarkably skilled at making insulated clothing from animal hides. Using bone needles, some dating back more than 40,000 years, they stitched fitted garments together with animal sinew. Loose skins thrown over the shoulders were no longer enough in the harshest climates. Properly tailored clothing trapped pockets of warm air, dramatically reducing heat loss. Fur also mattered. Many groups deliberately positioned the fur inward or outward, depending on weather conditions and the intended use of the garment. Thick winter footwear insulated feet from frozen ground, while multiple layers protected the body against biting winds. Even sleeping required planning. People often lined shelters with grasses, moss, reeds, or additional hides to reduce direct contact with frozen earth, since the ground could drain body heat throughout the night. Every layer counted. Every stitch mattered. A torn seam wasn't an inconvenience. It could become a dangerous opening through which precious body heat escaped hour after hour. The best clothing wasn't fashionable. It was life-saving. Finding shelter during winter demanded as much intelligence as finding food. A beautiful location meant nothing if freezing winds swept directly through it. Ancient humans searched for places where nature did part of the work for them. Rock overhangs blocked snow. Caves reduced exposure to icy winds, although they also carried risks if occupied by predators. In open landscapes where natural shelter was scarce, archaeological evidence shows that some Upper Paleolithic communities constructed shelters from wood, hides, and in certain regions even mammoth bones. These weren't random piles of material. They were engineered for survival. Builders placed entrances away from prevailing winds whenever possible. Animal skins covered wooden frameworks, creating enclosed spaces that trapped warmth generated by fires and human bodies. Inside, space was carefully organized. Fireplaces occupied central positions. Sleeping areas remained slightly removed from smoke while still benefiting from heat. Tools, fuel, and food stayed within easy reach because unnecessary trips outside exposed people to dangerous temperatures. Then came the hardest part, keeping the fire alive. Starting a new fire during freezing weather with damp materials could be extremely difficult. That's why many groups carefully preserved burning embers overnight beneath layers of ash or slow-burning fuel, allowing flames to be rekindled quickly the next morning. Losing a fire in the middle of winter wasn't merely frustrating. It could turn one freezing night into the last night a family ever experienced. When food disappeared completely, ancient humans turned to methods that seem unsettling today. They ate almost everything they could safely digest. Winter stripped the landscape bare. Berries had vanished. Many edible plants lay buried beneath frozen ground. Herds sometimes migrated hundreds of kilometers away. In these desperate conditions, survival depended on expanding the menu far beyond what modern people consider normal. People collected edible tree bark from certain species, scraping away the nutritious inner cambium layer when other foods became scarce. Pine nuts, stored by nature, hardy roots that survived beneath the frost, and dried mushrooms gathered months earlier suddenly became priceless. Along coastlines, shellfish and stranded marine animals could provide life-saving calories even during colder months. Nothing edible was ignored. Insects hidden beneath decaying logs occasionally offered valuable protein where climates allowed. Fish trapped beneath winter ice could be caught through carefully cut openings. Small animals became worthwhile because even a modest meal was better than no meal at all. This wasn't desperation born from poor planning. It was adaptability. The willingness to eat resources others overlooked gave humans an enormous advantage over predators that depended on only one type of prey. That flexibility became one of our species' greatest survival tools. Perhaps the darkest reality of ancient winters wasn't starvation. It was deciding who received the limited food that remained. Archaeological evidence from prehistoric communities suggests food sharing was central to survival. Successful hunters rarely kept everything for themselves because no individual succeeded every time. Sharing reduced the risk that one family's bad luck would become fatal while another possessed a temporary surplus. This cooperation strengthened entire communities. But cooperation never erased scarcity. When hunting failed repeatedly, every meal became more valuable than the last. Adults often reduced their own consumption, so children had a greater chance of surviving until spring. Ethnographic studies of later hunter-gatherer societies show that protecting younger generations frequently became a priority during severe shortages because they represented the future of the group. These choices carried enormous emotional weight. Parents watched supplies disappear day after day, knowing there was no guarantee another successful hunt would come before winter tightened its grip even further. The cold tested more than physical endurance. It tested trust. It tested generosity. It tested whether communities could remain united when fear whispered that survival might require thinking only of yourself. And surprisingly, archaeology suggests cooperation, not selfishness, was often the strategy that helped human groups endure the longest. That lesson may be the most remarkable survival technique of all, because the harshest winters in history were defeated not only by stronger hunters, but by stronger communities. There was another winter enemy that left almost no visible tracks: silence. During warmer months, people could follow migrating herds, gather edible plants, or travel long distances searching for new opportunities. Winter changed everything. Heavy snow slowed movement, concealed dangerous terrain, and erased familiar landmarks. A valley that looked safe in summer could become an icy trap after a single storm. Getting lost became terrifying. Fresh snowfall covered footprints within minutes. Rivers that usually guided travel disappeared beneath ice and snow. Thick fog and blowing winds reduced visibility to only a few meters. That's why many ancient groups avoided unnecessary journeys during severe weather. When travel became unavoidable, they relied on memory, recognizable rock formations, the position of the sun when visible, and generations of accumulated knowledge about seasonal landscapes. Every experienced elder carried an invisible map inside their mind, One wrong direction could waste precious energy that could never be replaced if food remained scarce. The safest decision was often staying exactly where they were, conserving calories until conditions improved. Sometimes survival meant doing less, not more. Winter also transformed the relationship between humans and predators. Hungry wolves, cave lions, hyenas, and bears faced the same shortage of food. As prey became harder to find, encounters with people sometimes became more likely, especially around carcasses or limited water sources. Ancient humans understood they weren't the only creatures fighting to survive. A freshly killed animal attracted attention almost immediately. The smell of blood carried across frozen landscapes. Hunters often worked quickly, removing valuable meat before larger scavengers arrived. Fires around camps provided light and warmth, but they also signaled that humans occupied the area. Groups maintained watches through the night because allowing a predator to approach unnoticed could end in disaster. Yet humans possessed one remarkable advantage: cooperation. A lone person stood little chance against a pack of wolves. Several armed adults working together presented a far more dangerous opponent. Archaeological evidence suggests coordinated hunting and group defense were already deeply established long before recorded history. Spears, carefully crafted stone points, wooden shafts, and later throwing technologies increased the distance between humans and danger. The cold created ruthless competition, but it also rewarded teamwork. Predators relied primarily on instinct. Humans relied on planning. And over countless winters, that difference slowly shifted the balance in humanity's favor. Even then, every trip beyond the warmth of camp carried a simple truth. In the frozen wilderness, you were never the only hunter searching for the next meal. Winter didn't just threaten the body, it threatened the mind. Imagine waking every morning to the same frozen landscape, the same empty horizon, and the same uncertainty about whether enough food remained for another week. Days grew shorter, nights stretched longer. Fierce storms could trap families inside shelters for days at a time, limiting movement and reducing opportunities to hunt. Yet archaeological discoveries suggest these long periods weren't spent waiting in silence. People repaired clothing before seams failed completely. They sharpened stone blades that would be needed when animals returned. Broken spear shafts were replaced. Bone needles were crafted. Cordage was twisted from plant fibers or animal sinew. Children learned essential skills by watching experienced adults work. Knowledge continued to grow even while the outside world stood frozen. Stories likely played an important role as well. Although prehistoric storytelling leaves almost no direct archaeological evidence, every known human society has used stories to preserve practical knowledge, strengthen social bonds, and teach younger generations. Around winter fires, lessons about dangerous animals, successful hunting grounds, changing seasons, and past hardships could be remembered long after the people who first experienced them were gone. Winter became a classroom. Every quiet evening prepared the group for the challenges still ahead. One of the harshest realities of ancient winters was that nature never guaranteed success. Some years were simply worse than others. Climate records preserved in ice cores, cave formations, and ancient sediments reveal periods of sudden cooling, unusually heavy snowfall, and changing rainfall patterns that dramatically altered local ecosystems. Herds sometimes shifted migration routes. Plant growth declined. Rivers froze earlier or remained frozen longer than expected. Preparation alone couldn't solve every problem. Communities had to adapt. Some moved toward coastlines where marine resources remained available. Others followed migrating animals into entirely new territories. Groups occasionally split into smaller bands, reducing pressure on limited food supplies before reuniting when conditions improved. Flexibility became a survival strategy. Humans succeeded not because every plan worked. They succeeded because they changed their plans when the environment changed first. That ability separated our ancestors from countless other species that depended on far narrower ecological conditions. Winter rewarded adaptation and punished stubbornness. By the time spring finally arrived, the people who emerged weren't simply lucky survivors. They were the individuals and communities who had spent months solving one impossible problem after another without giving up. And the darkest lesson of all was still waiting beyond the snow. The darkest survival method wasn't a weapon, it wasn't a shelter, it wasn't even fire. It was accepting that nature could not be controlled. Ancient humans learned this lesson through countless winters. They couldn't stop blizzards from burying the landscape. They couldn't force herds to remain nearby. They couldn't make plants grow beneath frozen ground. Instead, they adapted faster than the world changed around them. Archaeological evidence repeatedly points to the same pattern. When climates shifted, Humans shifted with them. When familiar prey disappeared, they hunted different species. When one valley became unlivable, they crossed mountains, rivers, and frozen plains in search of another. Other animals evolved over thousands of years. Humans changed their behavior within a single generation. That ability became our greatest survival tool. Every difficult winter acted as a brutal test. Groups that planned carefully, shared resources, repaired their tools, preserved knowledge, and cooperated stood a better chance of surviving until spring. Those lessons accumulated year after year. Each generation inherited not only better tools, but better decisions. The harshest seasons became humanity's greatest teachers. So what was the darkest survival method used by ancient humans during winter? It wasn't one horrifying trick. It was the willingness to do whatever reality demanded while staying together as a community. They harvested every usable calorie from an animal, because wasting food invited starvation. They stitched warm clothing from hides because exposed skin meant deadly heat loss. They guarded precious embers through freezing nights because losing fire could mean losing everything. They delayed journeys, changed migration routes, expanded their diets, repaired every tool, protected children, cared for injured companions, and trusted knowledge passed down over countless generations. None of those choices were glamorous. Many were exhausting. Some were heartbreaking. Yet together they allowed one vulnerable species to survive Ice Age winters that eliminated countless other creatures from the same landscapes. Modern people often imagine ancient humans as primitive because they lacked technology. In reality, they possessed something equally powerful, an extraordinary ability to observe, learn, cooperate, and adapt under relentless pressure. Every heated home, every stocked supermarket, every insulated jacket, and every weather forecast exists because those ancient survivors endured winters that seemed impossible to overcome. They didn't conquer nature, they learned how to live with it. And perhaps that's the greatest survival lesson they left behind. The real darkness of those winters wasn't simply the cold or the hunger. It was waking each morning with no promise that tomorrow would come, and choosing to fight for it anyway.